Hello, everyone. Welcome to another binary episode of the Day Zero podcast. I'm Spectre, with me is Z. Before we get into topics, let's cover the Spot the Vuln solution. So Z, take that away.
Yeah, this week's Spot the Vuln was a little bit different from normal, being that this was a smart contract vulnerability, which Spectre and I have both kind of talked about on the show before, and is definitely not either of our strong suits. So this one, it's a reentrancy vulnerability, which I thought was just kind of a... So I've just been learning kind of more about the smart contract vulnerabilities, and this was one of the vulnerability class that kind of stood out to me a little bit as being somewhat unique to how smart contracts work. Although you can kind of relate it to like a race condition, except you're guaranteed to always win the race in a sense. But the idea here, we've got the contract called Spot the Vuln. In function withdraw, we do a couple steps. Get the current user's balance. Then we try and send that message, send or call. We're just, whoever called us, we're sending them their balance back. That's the gist of that line. Require success. And then we zero out the user balances. The issue comes in that message, send or call, where it's sending the money back over, the tokens back over to whoever called, so whatever they deposited. When you do that in smart contracts, you'll effectively be saying, or you'll be providing an opportunity for that other user, for whoever called this, their smart contract, if their address is a contract, they can have code there that will then execute before anything else, or the rest of that function and withdraw. So they can then go ahead and call withdraw once again from their own callback, and just keep calling that, and you're just going to keep sending them money because you've never actually made it all the way down to zeroing out that user balance. So it's called a reentrancy because you re-enter the contract unexpected. So instead, to fix this, ideal case, you would zero out that balance before you sent the value, which feels a little bit weird to me. Just in doing development work, I tend to write the code where it's like I do the transaction or I do something, make sure it worked, and then update my local state versus updating the state and then calling out. But because you are calling out to an external contract, there's a chance for external code to run. You need to do all of your state updates before you hand over control in that case. So, I mean, it's kind of unique to how smart contracts end up working here, so I thought it was a good Spot the Vuln. This is a really classic one. Like, if you go Google reentrancy vulnerabilities, you'll probably find either this exact code or almost exact code.
Yeah, this issue specifically was actually the cause of the Ethereum and Classic Ethereum fork that happened back in 2016. For anyone that might remember that, the infamous DAO hack, it was based on this reentrancy bug, and it caused, I think, the attackers stole like $50 million worth of Ethereum at the time, like 3.6 million Ethereum. So, yeah, like this is not only a neat bug to have as a Spot the Vuln because it's fairly simplistic. You can keep it in, a few lines of code, but it's also one that's led to massive damage before in the crypto ecosystem. So, yeah, quite a unique one from some of the other ones that we've done for sure. But yeah, with that out of the way, we'll get into some of our topics for the week. First of all, some of you might have noticed in the reverse engineering community, Binary Ninja 3.0 dropped. I ended up finding this out accidentally because I was writing a custom architecture plugin for Binja last week, and unfortunately, where I'm on some of the lower versions, you have to reload Binja entirely to test new plugin changes. So I ended up doing that. In one of those reloads, Binja ended up updating, and I came into a totally new user interface, and it threw me off for a few minutes. I had to get reacquainted with the interface because I was actually testing lifting, so HLIL stuff. So I was like, wait, where is everything? How do I do that again? So that was kind of a fun experience. But yeah, some of the major points from Binja 3 is the new UI, which I like a lot, by the way. I think it's a lot more intuitive. The split view is also very nice to use, and I leveraged it heavily when I was doing that plugin development after I updated. They also added pseudo C, which is like a level above high level IL or HLIL. Basically, just converts it into something that you could possibly compile. More because one of the major complaints with the ILs from people were that they couldn't, like HLIL had the .d suffixes and these prefixes, and it was a little bit weird. It wasn't exactly like a decompilation output you get from Ghidra or IDA or whatever. So that's why they added the pseudo-C, and I tested it out a little bit, and it seems to be pretty good. No complaints there really. It seems to
Have you
be.
tried compiling from it?
I haven't tried compiling from it. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
that
I
skipped
can
my mind.
understand why people want that, because I mean, one thing is you can do the lifting out of Binja, compile it, and then compile it using something like LVM and get it over to an LVMIR, and then do all of the analysis that are built with LVMIR. You then get access to. Like, there's a lot of things that you can get out of having something that can be compiled. But for actually reading, I still kind of I like having. I mean, especially in the first version of HLIL, um, the size annotations were really annoying, but they did improve that with one of their later updates. So I still kind of like HLIL, but it is nice to at least have that option.
Yeah,
To go to
I
C.
like that they separated it out as two separate things. And because of the way the split view works, you can have the best of both worlds. You can have the HLIL and the pseudo C view as well. Um, it's all up to you how you lay it out. Um, some of the other things they added were stack and variable views, which are pretty neat. When you're viewing a function, you can get a listing of the state of the stack and whatnot, which can be useful, especially if you're doing exploits, like a stack based or a stack overflow or something. That view can be useful to you. Um, the other major thing that came in, which I haven't really looked at too much because it's more on the developer side, is workflows. Basically, workflows are the new version of analysis passes, which allow plugins to more easily hook into and take over the analysis phase in Binary Ninja to do things like rewrite IL, change order of analysis, or just roll your own analysis for specific files in general. So if you have some custom format for an executable or whatever that's used by a system, then it's you have more power and flexibility with workflows than you used to with the analysis passes. There are a few examples that they put out there as well. The one that they talk about in here is the Objective C fixer upper, which will fix missing XREFs and whatnot for Objective C. They have an image that kind of demonstrates what they're talking about here. Try to scroll down to it. There we go. Um, but yeah, sadly, I haven't really looked into that too much. Custom file formats are not something that I've had to write a plugin for yet. But it seems like, from what I'm reading here, at least in some of the example code, it seems like a major benefit to plugin authors for Binja.
Yeah, I mean, it basically seems to make workflows a lot more powerful to just drop right in, replace things that Binge is already doing, or add on to them. Um, I mean, with a lot of Binge, like plugins have been one of their strong points in terms of. I don't want to say it's like plugins are a first class citizen, but they're definitely thinking about plugins as they do the development, and that is nice to have. So workflows are kind of a continuation of that. It's going to depend on what people actually start doing with them. They're just kind of putting it out there, and people have to actually take advantage of what they're doing. And unfortunately, like Binja isn't the most popular option, so we'll see how that goes. But it is nice to have.
Touching a little bit on what you were talking about with plugins being like a first class citizen, I don't think there's any room for argument that any other product beats Binja when it comes to plugins and extendability. IDA it's usable. Obviously, there is a lot of plugins. It's had years of support from the community, but the API is pretty bad. There's also breaking changes across every version change. Not even every major version change. Just any version change in general will break the API. Ghidra, I mean, maybe this is more of a personal complaint, but it's Java. I don't really care to write Java. I'll stay away from that. People can have their job if they want, but I don't want to write it.
Gonna go with
So
Jython.
yeah, So, like in terms of writing plugins, I don't think anything really beats Binary Ninja, but there is that caveat that you mentioned that there isn't the same
Ecosystem around it.
yeah, there's not the same ecosystem. There's not enough plugin developers really writing too many things, and it's going to take some time for it to catch up to IDA and possibly even Ghidra, just in terms of how many different plugins are out there. Um, I do think that is an issue that'll fade over time. Um,
Hopefully, yeah.
yeah, I think we will see more adoption as time goes on, especially like this is a little bit out of scope, so I won't talk about it too much. But the IDA stuff that we covered, I think before we went on our Christmas break, there's a lot of people that are still not very happy with the direction that IDA is going. So we could see more adoption of Binary Ninja, and thus more support in the ecosystem of plugins for it too. So yeah, that's something we'll have to wait and see. But overall, I mean, with Binja 3.0. There was a lot of really good improvements there. There was also some other minor improvements like function parameter detection. They improved. They also have full support for M1 Max now. There was also some architecture level improvements, which they have some links to those and you can check those out. I didn't really look at those too much, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, for me, the big thing is the UI change, because my view on the Binja UI for a while has been it's beautiful, it looks great, but it doesn't feel that useful. It feels like the clean design of it gets in the way of usability. Whereas something like IDA, maybe it doesn't look as nice, but you can get a lot more information without having to jump around or change tabs or whatever. Um, and I feel like with this UI revamp, they struck a great balance of still keeping the look clean, but it's also a lot easier for me personally, at least, to be productive in it now. The split views are awesome. The way they have the graph overview, and the way the left side of the, like, you can see in the image for those that are watching, just the way the sidebar has been redesigned is really nice. Keeping the tabbed icons on the side and being able to quickly switch between symbol view and type view and whatever. And I mean, yeah, I just think their UI revamp is the biggest thing for me that I really liked, and of course the pseudo C um, stuff is really nice too, because that's something that people have been wanting for a while. So yeah, figured we'd give it a shout out on the show here. Pretty substantial changes, and some pretty good changes. So if these features sound interesting to you and you're following Benja, and you haven't seen this blog post already, I'd recommend checking it out. The link, as always, will be up on our site and our summaries for the episode. So we'll get into some of our exploits now. We'll start off with the headliner of the week, which was a disclosure of a vulnerability in polkit's pkexec, which is a suid binary that's present on every major Linux distribution and was very easy and reliable to exploit. So that's part of the reason why it was such a headlining topic. The impact was pretty big there. polkit, previously PolicyKit, for those not familiar, is for controlling privileges on a system-wide scale. It does some things like facilitating IPC between privileged and non-privileged processes. It's also possible to run commands with elevated privileges using pkexec. So yeah, it's kind of this useful utility. I haven't really used it myself very much, but I'm also not like a sysadmin, so that's
Yeah, it's a
probably
little bit
why.
more configurable than something like just sudo. I think that's where it's had more of its use. I haven't used it a ton myself either.
Yeah. So the bug here is an out of bounds access on argv, which is pretty damn amazing because I don't think we've ever covered such a bug before, where it was, right in the arguments to the program. That's almost like a Stack Overflow tutorial in like a 2005
Being
war
in
game
the
or something.
arguments kind of feels like, the CTF style where it's like, this is here for your educational value, but this isn't how you'd
You'll never
actually get
find
the
this in the
argument.
real world.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
mean, it's interesting because this issue itself was actually first talked about in pkexec, no less, back in 2013 yet. So, like, it's not even some new issue that nobody knew about. I mean, the other guy that came across this, in 2013 didn't have an exploit for it, which is where Qualys comes in and kind of builds up what he found. But it's It's something that was seen and noticed before, just not weaponized.
Yeah, and there was definitely some drama and discussion around that. The fact that this has been in there for so long, kind of open for anyone to see, and it just never got addressed. So, yeah, we can get into that a little bit later, though.
Yeah, let's cover
Um,
what the issue was first.
yeah, so when parsing the arguments, the program arguments, they do this loop with a starting index of 1. I think you have it up. Yeah, you have it up on the screen here. Um, and the reason for that is arg0 will always be the program name itself, which usually you're not interested in as the program that's being executed. The problem is if you pass no arguments and argc is 0, a lookup of argv1 will still be performed and written to, and that's obviously going to be out of bounds because there is no second element to access from arguments. It
So
turns out
just
what's
for
Go ahead.
listeners there, it accesses the argv_n after the loop. So n is in theory pointing to the last element, the last argument, but because there were no arguments, n equals 1, just what it was initialized to. So I just wanted to clarify for those listening there that it's accessing n, not exactly hitting 1.
Yeah.
Although n equals
In
1.
Yeah, in practice, it's accessing array element 1. So, yep, that's going to be out of bounds. It turns out what's read there is a pointer to a path, which gets stirred up, then rewritten to the same location later on if the path is a relative path. And, well, because of the way execve reads inputs for programs, what immediately follows the argv array is the envp array, which is the environment variables. So effectively, the out-of-bounds write allows smashing of the first environment variable
Sorry, if
in
I
the
could
program.
jump in quickly.
Yep.
So
Go
first of
ahead.
all, it writes back. What it does is it takes that path, so it takes whatever program you're specifying as pkexec, whatever program as your last argument. It goes and finds program in the path. So you provide that path, and it's going to look up for some program in it first, and it's going to generate a string based on that. That's what it writes back. It writes back a full path into argvn, or into 1 in this case. That's what's writing back, and also the MVP aspect is kind of coming also just main itself. A lot of people don't necessarily realize this because we always have like main argc char star argv as being like your default. There is non-standard, but it is very, very common. Also, envp is passed in there. There's actually a third argument being passed to main most of the time, which is your environment pointer. So that's where the out of bounds accessing to that. It's not in the execv. So I think you were going into execv at that point, whereas this access is a little bit off from that, or earlier.
Yeah. So I think I should have worded that better. Because this goes a little bit too low level, like for what I wanted to cover on the show. But yeah, basically what's happening is main isn't your like actual first entry point into the program. For like the programmer's sake, for the application, it's you can consider main the entry point, but actually the libc is going to have its own startup and initialization routine, which then sets up the arguments to main that you get, which
Yeah,
would
like you've
include
got
the argc,
start,
argv,
start,
argb,
yeah,
or sorry,
start
nvp.
main and stuff before you hit main.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what sets up the data that gets overwritten here. Um, I was just kind of generalizing it to execve for like that process, but I probably shouldn't have done that. So yeah,
Yeah,
fair
so
enough.
as I understood it, I thought you were talking about later on when it goes to execute it using execv.
Yeah,
So I just misunderstood what you meant too.
all good. So um, yeah, so you can smash the first environment variable in that array, and most notably, this environment variable can be overwritten post filtering, which allows you to introduce unsecure environment variables that are normally stripped out by ld.so, such as ld preload, and that's a powerful capability to have because you now can get some root program to run with like a custom preloaded library or whatever other attack you want to go with. And that's kind of where the privilege escalation aspect of this comes from.
Yeah, and
So
that's also kind of what the new thing was for Qualys versus that 2013 report on this. Was it back in 2013? This guy found this okay, and you can get this. Basically, pkexec will try and execute that first argument as if it were a program. is what knows, but you can't provide any arguments. There's nothing useful that you could really do with that. You might be able to get to execute like a SecUid program, but or I guess pkexec is the SecUid program. You might be able to get to execute something, but if it's going to run as root, you need to authenticate as root also. So not very useful if you can't pass any options. And he couldn't figure out how to get any arguments. Wallace, their new thing was, okay, well, let's not try and do any new arguments. Let's inject an environment variable, which would normally get stripped because we're in a SUID binary.
Yeah, so this exploit is seriously impactful because it's a root privilege escalation. It works on all Linux distributions or at least major Linux distributions and possibly other operating systems that use it. I think they say with the exception of OpenBSD because that won't execute binaries with an argc of 0. I think it was OpenBSD.
It's one
Can't
of the
remember for sure.
BSDs for sure.
Yeah, and if I had to guess, it would be Open because that's usually the most secure of them. And yeah, and even though this is a memory corruption issue, because of the context surrounding it, this should be like 100% stable and reliable. I don't see anything that would really get in your way of trying to exploit this because something that's not 100% deterministic, like the heap or something. So yeah, I mean this seems like the perfect exploit if you're an attacker trying to get a privilege escalation. And as we kind of hinted at earlier, it's existed for 12 years. So it's been around for a long time, and it would be interesting to know like if this has been taken advantage of in attacks in the past, especially where it was like a public bug. It wasn't really secret. It just wasn't known in that
Fortunately, it sounds like you cut out on us,
original
Spectre.
blog post how to exploit it.
You're going to have to
Um,
repeat that. We lost you for a bit.
Okay, I don't know exactly which point I cut out, but I was just saying like this should be like a 100% stable and reliable exploit, and thus it should be a like prime acquisition for anyone who wants to do a privilege escalation. So it does make you think, and the fact that it's existed for 12 years at least, and the bug was like public knowledge from that earlier
Seems like you keep
blog
cutting
post
out as
you
soon as you
you
start
showed.
mentioning that this was public knowledge. So I'm going to take it that you're currently getting censored by somebody who does not want that to be known. Um, but
Probably
yeah,
that's
I do
probably what's
agree with
happening.
you.
Yeah.
Like, definitely impactful, easy to exploit. Kind of a cool database attack in this case, out of bounds. Read and write, but kind of just going after the local data to do something with it. So it is, again, we're seeing more data attacks. Honestly, like, it's a cool attack, obviously impactful, and yeah, I mean, maybe it was used. I don't know if anybody's really talked about being used. The fact that it's known, like, maybe increase the chances of it, but I mean, it's not like it was a well-known issue. Like, yes, there was a blog post in 2013. There are a lot of blog posts out there. I mean, it's definitely possible if somebody were looking at pkexec, they very well may have come across blog posts and realized what you could do with it. So definitely possible. Apparently, the author also of the 2013 post did try to get it patched and just found the whole process, like, just found it a little bit too much work or too annoying. And I think he might have submitted the patch, but then didn't get accepted. There was something involved with patching there too. That's at least worth noting, that there was an attempt to be a bit more responsible about it. It just wasn't seen as severe enough to warrant much attention. Because, I mean, again, didn't recognize what you could do with it or how powerful the primitive could be.
Yeah, so this article spawned some interesting discussion on social media. One of them was the like criticism around the bug being known about for so long and just nothing being done about it. The other discussion that I saw being brought up was uh I think this was brought up by Mark Han, but he was kind of going with the meme of, well, I guess to him it's not really a meme, but saying this is why we need Rust for system utilities. So, of course, whenever these kinds of issues come up, the Rust always has to enter the discussion. The Ferris the crab is happy. So, Yeah, I mean, I guess this is a fair example, though, to point at, like, if you were using Rust, you probably would have been safe from at least this type of issue specifically. So, you know, that discussion was out there, but I don't think there was too much back and forth on that. It was mostly just people saying, like, yeah, we probably should be using more memory safe languages where it's possible, and we've always been kind of for that. I mean, we do joke about the Rust memes, but um, when you're not working at the like system level, like kernel or whatever, and even then, there's people arguing that Rust should be in the kernel, which we talked about before too. But especially at the utility level, it does kind of make sense to not use something like C. Um, and obviously, the reason it's using C is because these utilities are very old; they go back decades. So
Yeah, there's a lot of
that's just
history
how everything
there.
was written there. But like, it does make sense to try to rewrite things like this in a memory safe language, and I
Yeah,
think
I
that
mean,
does make
I'll
sense as an initiative.
I'll occasionally, I'll casually show Rust, but really any higher level language like C doesn't seem to be the well because at the level of access also you need to be doing like the syscalls here. I mean, maybe C. I guess Rust does kind of make sense. Go. Um, there's a lot of cases where I feel like utilities do kind of need some lower level access, so it maybe not C, but something. But I mean, I don't feel like it's really the right discussion. I think it's well recognized that yes, we need to, start using safer languages in general, and I think in a lot of cases people are using safer languages. Um, it's it doesn't feel like we could point to pretty much any vulnerability and say therefore use Rust.
Yeah, the reason that it's being so heavily pushed right now, though, is just because of the impact of this bug. Um, so I did want to mention that discussion was happening, but I didn't want to go too deep into it. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, like I said, that this was a vulnerability that made ripples just because of how impactful it was. So we'll move on to some of our other vulnerabilities
Yeah, and unfortunately, we're still having issues with your audio, so I'll carry on
here.
with this
Next, we
one.
have a type confusion in Win32k in the GUI API.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what's going on with Spectre's audio in and out, but yeah, this last one or the second one here is Windows object type confusion in the Win32k. So we've talked about similar issues before, where you've got like in the Windows kernel, you're able to register certain callbacks that certain events happen, and kernel is going to give you your user line application, a callback saying like, "Hey, this thing happened, do whatever." Um, so they've got kind of the class of them here: menu window proc, sb win proc, basically various functions that will end up leading to ultimately this client alloc window class extra bytes hook or callback getting executed. During that, whatever receives the callback can go ahead and change the console window flag of the tag WND object. And modifying that will change kind of the Windows type. The problem is when that callback returns, the thing actually making the callback and that's did all of that doesn't recognize or doesn't look to see if the window type has changed. So effectively, you end up having a different structure, different setup there. So what was a user mode pointer, the system ends up thinking is, or what is a user mode pointer, the system ends up thinking is the offset to the kernel's desktop heap, which basically gives you the ability to cause out of bounds access, out of bounds read and writes, and a fairly powerful primitive there. Uh, but definitely an issue we have seen quite a few times before. I feel like we've definitely talked about at least a couple of these before. Um, I think Spectre wanted to talk. I saw him unmute here, but then he didn't say anything. Sorry.
I think one of them, unfortunately, was on that North Korea blog.
It might have been actually. Now that you mention it,
Okay. Yeah, I was just
well, oh,
saying maybe it cut out, but I think one of those was unfortunate. But um, Yeah, I mean, it just seems to be a problem whenever you're. Am I not coming through at all? I'm seeing.
Well, no, we just had you, but
Okay,
I heard
I'll
you
keep
last time.
talking and hope, pray that it actually goes through. But anyway,
Of course, it's every time you start, you actually get back into saying something, you cut out. Um, but yeah, I thought this was still like it's an interesting case because Windows does enable this sort of callback and just changing out the type, leading to the type confusions. We're seeing it a bunch. It's definitely a place like if you're looking for Windows issues, it feels like the type of area that you might want to look at if you're not already. Although I feel like if you're looking at the Windows kernel, you don't need me to tell you to be looking at this or looking at that sort of thing. They do go into a little bit on the exploit flow for this, because this was a an exploit that was found in the wild. This is Project Zero's O Days in the Wild thing. They include a few points on that. Nothing really remarkable there. CB Windows extra uh, modifying that. Basically, they go through it. You can read into it. It kind of require understanding more of the Windows internals to get the whole point of it, but from the primitive, I think you can kind of imagine how you'd go about this anyhow, and then it's just the Windows specific target. Spectre, if you
I
want to
left
give it
and
another try.
yeah, I left and rejoined, so hopefully, we're good to go. I guess just let me know if it's not. But yeah, what I was trying to say there was just whenever you have this kind of pattern where you're allowing user mode callbacks from kernel functions, it just seems designed to allow fails. Um, it's really hard to account for this type of design because like when you're in kernel, obviously you're going to have to make assumptions on the state of an object, and whenever you allow the user to get some code ran in between there, any assumptions that you made before are no longer valid. You have to re-verify those assumptions. So any place where you miss one or just forget to do any entirely. So yeah, I mean that's why we've seen it so much in the past, and why we'll probably continue to see it in the future.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean it's hard to defend against. I suppose one of the ways would be locking any of your key objects so you just can't modify them during the callback. Um, Using some sort of message queue so that the changes need to be queued up so they can't happen concurrently. Like there are kind of architectural changes that could happen, but that would require architectural changes.
yeah. I don't know if you really got into this while I was like being and rejoining and trying to sort my stuff out, but they do go a little bit into the exploit strategy. Um, Nothing super interesting there. Basically, they use their initial out of bounds right and use that to build better corruption primitives. So they smash the CBWD extra field, which is used as a size of the window object to get a less constrained out of bounds right, and then they use that to derive their arbitrary read-write primitives by crafting a fake menu for another window, extra bytes field of another window for the arbitrary write. And then once you have that, it's pretty bog standard for Windows. You use the arb read write to find a system token, and then you write that into your process. Pretty standard as far as Windows goes. On the Vuln research methodology, P0 just speculates that this was probably found with code auditing for user mode callbacks, just because this is such a common uh, flaw. That's all they really say on that. So yeah, I mean, this
Yeah, like they
design
say,
is
I
poorly
mean,
written.
you could definitely go for the variant analysis on this. It is one of those places that you see the callback. We're seeing this sort of issue.
Yeah. So we'll move into our last exploit topic here, which is a Linux kernel bug. Um, well, actually, a few Linux kernel bugs. The first one I found here is in VMWGFX, which is VMware's 2D and 3D acceleration code. And the other two are in FA Notify and Fast RPC. And those were basically variants of what the initial bug was. The issue comes down to a cleanup path and an error path where attempting to create a file and initializing it, they would install the file into the FD table and then try to initialize the some object by copying data from userland. And obviously, whenever you're copying data from userland, that can fail either by accident or intentionally. And if that happened, they'd fput the file and return a fail error code. Which might seem reasonable until you consider that as soon as you call fd install in the Linux kernel, that file descriptor is accessible to anybody, regardless of whether or not you fully initialize whatever you're attaching to that file. So there's this race window where some code could end up grabbing that file descriptor and perform some action on it, like close or whatever, which then runs in parallel with the fail path, which would put the file descriptor, and you have this race use after free scenario. What makes this even more impactful is very similar to the polkit exploit that we covered earlier. This can be very easily exploited without even needing to worry about like smap or smep or whatever, because you can get memory for a file object reallocated by just running a tight loop of close and opening another file, and that would allow you to get an fd handle on some other newly opened file that overlaps with it, such as etc shadow or some other privileged file that you normally shouldn't be able to have access to. So again, one of these memory corruption bugs that you can exploit in a high level manner to get a pretty reliable exploit strategy working without having to do any complex chaining or something.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a nice attack scenario there with the close and then let something else reopen the file. It's also like I totally get where the dev signaling, like, you do your work, copy from you or copy out, and then if it airs out, kill the file because you don't need that anymore. Like, I totally get where dev comes from on this, and it's easy to not think, but okay, you just made this expose. Like, even though your window might be pretty short and pretty small, that window of it, you just made this available to userland, and I'm now going to put it again, is a very small, or is often going to be a pretty small window, but it is there, and it is something that an attacker could take advantage of. So like I totally get where a dev might overlook this one. But yeah, I mean it's also just easy to understand exactly what's going on here.
so as I mentioned earlier, this pattern also existed in FA Notify and the fast RPC driver. In FA Notify's case, the bug is only reachable if you have capsys admin, and it has to be in the initial namespace, so you can't get around it with user namespaces like some of the past bugs that we've covered. Similarly, I think fast RPC is something that won't be common amongst installations because, if I remember correctly, it's a Qualcomm driver, so you would need some config and some system setup that allows that attack surface to really be hit. So yeah, this is a really cool bug and exploit, and would be a seemingly pretty reliable exploit. Though the trigger conditions are fairly high, because outside of FA Notify, they're in special drivers that are dependent on the setup, and FA Notify itself requires privileges. So, not as impactful as it could have been, I guess, because it's not something that can really be accessed unprivileged on like every distro or something. So, yeah. That's basically all of the bugs that we have for this week. We do have a discussion that we wanted to get into a little bit, and this is spawned off of a question that came out of our Discord, which I believe was along the lines of,
I've got the
how do you deal
question
with
here.
imposter syndrome? Okay, go ahead. So I'll let you
Yeah,
cover it then.
so question out of chat. I was going to just respond in chat, but I thought it might make a decent discussion here too. Is, do you guys suffer from imposter syndrome? I feel so bad when I read high quality reports from legit researchers, and I focus a lot on how many years it will take for me to ever get on their level, and it eats at my soul knowing that will likely be decades or never. As an example of it, and do you guys suffer from this negative thought pattern? And absolutely. I mean, I now kind of use the example here, but Spectre in the chat. So we met quite a long time ago before Spectre was even doing really any exploit dev, I think. I don't think you had done any, maybe like some web stuff. I don't even think you were doing that yet.
I don't think I was doing any security when we met. No.
Yeah, and at that point, I was already working in the security industry, and here's Spectre come better than me in some areas of, completely showing me up. 7 years my junior, or 8, I don't know anymore, but a fair bit younger than me, showing me up. And it's like, sure, I get imposter syndrome from Spectre alone, but at the same time, screw it. I mean, I've got my own experiences, and that's at least the perspective I've tended to take with a lot of it. Is just we all have our own background, our own experiences, and our own things that we've learned. We all learn at our own rate. And it's always a frustrating job. Like doing the Vuln research is never, well, sometimes it is, but it's usually not. Like you read those reports and they just know, like, hey, I found this issue, and then I do this thing and this thing and this thing, and everything works together. What's missing in there is those hours of head bashing against the wall, not knowing what to do and not knowing how things would connect. Those aren't, you don't generally see those in the reports that you read. You just see the final results after those hours have been spent and after people have been frustrated, and ultimately after they've had their success most of the time. You miss a lot of that perspective there. The frustration's always part of it, and when it comes to other people knowing more, like they might know more in one area, you might just be learning, so there are not many areas you know more than others in, but you just kind of keep grinding, you keep doing it. It's fine if you're like, don't compare yourself with anybody else really, because your own path is going to be different. We've all taken our own route there. It's just you keep going, you keep learning things, and because security is such a specialized area and where everybody kind of has this very specialized knowledge base that just comes from all those frustrating rabbit holes you go down that don't do anything productive but help you prevent it the next time. Like it just adds up over time, and we all have different rabbit holes we've been down. That's why it's a team job too. Like people work together in this field and kind of join knowledge rather than trying to know everything.
I'm so flattered I gave you imposter syndrome. And I'm sorry. But no, like I suffered from it too, for sure. And I think the main like drive behind that is just the fact that infosec and security in general is such a wide field, and nobody has deep knowledge in everything. So those who hyper focus on a particular area or type of research are going to be posting a lot of those like awesome write-ups of stuff that you read about. With Project Zero going deep into like Mac OS kernel, for example, the people that are posting those write-ups have spent years reading and playing around in that code. And those write-ups are like, they're a great opportunity to gain some depth in that area, if you don't really have it, or to expand it even if you do. But that doesn't somehow mean that you're like diminished somehow, because of the great information and research that's there. And Buckley in the Discord made a good point, that I wanted to raise, which was something along the lines of, the more you know about security, the more areas you become aware of that you don't know yet. And that's kind of true of everything, right? Like the more that you know about something, the more you realize you don't know. And generally, like it's a good thing to be aware of what you don't know, and where you might want to gain some knowledge. Um, Another quote that somebody used, that I know that I thought was pretty good was, if you feel like you know everything and you're better than everyone else in a particular circle or a chat room, then you're probably spending too much time in that circle. Um, so it's just one of those things where a lot of the time when people seem like they're a lot, better than you, or they're a lot more technically uh, in depth than you are, it's just because they've put a lot more time and effort into that particular area that they're looking at. Um, and yeah, that's kind of the way that I have helped myself get over it, I guess.
And that's the important point. Like, people have spent more time in one area than you have. Like, it happens, and I think it's really easy to have this perspective that everybody is just miles and years ahead of you. Um, just because like you only see the final results. Like I think that's kind of an important thing too. That's one reason why quite a while back I recommended a Twitch streamer, Al Hazred. Simply because he streams, like he shows his own frustration during some of those streams, at least back when I watched him a little bit. It's been a little while now, but I assume he's still doing the same thing, and I remember that being one of his motivators for doing the streams, was showing um what was basically showing exactly that sort of that frustration, not just having everything planned out and going perfectly like you get with the YouTube videos or the write-ups of how you go through everything. I mean, it's hard thing, you just have to learn to deal with it. I guess imposter syndrome's common. I think some studies have been done saying it's basically common along any profession that has what would be called experts. And security is absolutely one of those. But apparently, doctors also go through it. As another example, just anywhere you've got experts, you have people feeling like, and kind of as Spectre touched on, like there's so much you don't know, and you become aware of all these things you don't know.
Yeah, one model that I think you actually told me about that put some things into perspective is the T-shaped model. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit, just for people who might not be aware of that idea. But it
Yeah,
helped me out a lot.
the T-shaped model is effectively, being a T-shaped professional is how it was described to me when I first started doing consulting was, a lot of us will have this one area that we go really deep in our knowledge in, that we've spent a lot of time in, go really deep, and then we have this broad understanding of everywhere else, and oftentimes, like, for myself, like, I have a pretty reasonable understanding when it comes to, like, application security. That's an area I've gone deeper in. If I hit network security, like, I have this surface level understanding, but not great, but I draw on my application knowledge to kind of help me out where I don't know. And so I have this higher, like, broader surface level thing, kind of creating this T shape. Broad understanding of a bunch of areas and very deep understanding in one or two areas. Kind of creating this T shape thing. And that's generally how a lot of security professionals are, is this T shape thing.
Yeah. And like lately, like the past year or so, I've been trying to expand a little bit more on the the top part of the T, like just trying to get more knowledge in other areas that I'm not super familiar with, like smart contracts. Bring it around a little bit to the start of the episode. Um and yeah, like that's kind of where I've been focusing, but it just having that mental model of the T shape helps put things into perspective a little bit along the lines of what I was talking about with figuring out what you don't know. So,
And I guess
yeah.
one thing I'd also just want to add on there is maybe you are an imposter and that's okay. Just, keep it up. I guess one question out of chat that is kind of important is the T uppercase or lowercase. Definitely think of a capital or uppercase T with that. Um, Jumping back though, like, if you do realize you don't know as much, it's okay. Just keep going. I mean, you can't change where you are. You can only change where you go.
All right. And I think that's probably a good place to wrap up the show. So, that's everything we have for the week. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. The VOD will be up on Twitch immediately or on other platforms like YouTube tomorrow. We also have previous podcasts up on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and more links on Anchor. If you want to join the community, follow our Twitter and join our Discord. Links for those are down below or in the chat. With that said, we'll be back again next week on Monday for the Bounty episode and Tuesday for the Binary episode. And we'll see you all next week.